Today's webinar is Gates' Global Power Grab, Building a Movement Against Oligarchy, and we're super excited for a wonderful panel of speakers and moderator. Today's program was jointly organized by U.S. Right to Know, a growing culture, and Community Alliance for Global Justice, and our program AgriWatch. My name is Heather Day. I'm the director of CAGJ. And on behalf of all the organizers, I just want to say how grateful we are to our speakers for agreeing to participate in this really important and timely dialogue. And we're just really thankful to all of you for joining as well today. I'm now going to turn it over to our moderator, Tim Schwab, who, in addition to facilitating the conversation, was invited to set the stage for our conversation today. Tim is an investigative journalist and author. You can find and really highly recommend you find him on Substack. He's very active. Tim recently published the amazing investigation book entitled The Bill Gates Problem: Reckoning with the Myth of the Good Billionaire. Thank you so much, Tim, for moderating today.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're happy to have a global audience for this event and a group of panelists from around the globe, because today we are talking about Bill Gates, a global actor, one of the most powerful and least scrutinized political actors on the world stage. We live today in a new gilded age of extreme wealth and extreme inequality, and there's growing public understanding and public alarm at these extreme problems. And there's a growing understanding too that these are political problems, that political decisions have been made on our behalf to organize our world, our economy in such an unequal way, where a very small number of individuals can acquire personal fortunes of $100 billion or $400 billion, while billions of people around the globe can't provide the basics for their families, even sometimes in rich nations. And there's a growing awareness, too, that we can make other political decisions. We can organize our economy differently, and indeed we must. And there's good news on this front, because there's growing awareness of this problem and a growing desire to challenge oligarchy in our lives. So recently, this is the American context from the University of Massachusetts. They recently did a survey and they found that nearly half of Americans say the United States is an oligarchy. And even among Trump supporters, I'm quoting, 1 in 5 see the system as rigged for the rich. So this is the view from the United States, sort of the primary stomping ground of the billionaire class. And we can only imagine that this anti-oligarch sentiment is widely understood, widely felt, and widely opposed around the world. So this sudden use in the public debate on extreme wealth, the sudden use of the word oligarch, it shows how far the public debate has evolved. It's a very good thing, but there's a problem. This word oligarch is being selectively used to describe only some billionaires. So the emblem or totem of oligarchy today is Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, a man worth perhaps $400 billion. He donated a very, very tiny percentage of his great wealth to help get Donald Trump elected. As a reward for his campaign contributions, he had a high-profile advisory position at Donald Trump, which he very effectively used to sow chaos and destruction around the globe. So yes, absolutely, Elon Musk is an oligarch. It is right and righteous for us to confront and challenge Elon Musk as an oligarch. But here's the problem. Many of the people who are eager to call Elon Musk an oligarch are also eager to swing the pendulum back to a different corner of the billionaire class led by Bill Gates. And these are the good billionaires, we're told. Whereas Elon Musk is this destructive despot, Bill Gates is this altruist and a humanitarian, somebody who is not a political actor, but somebody who is freely giving away his great wealth in a highly effective manner to save millions of lives. So Bill Gates is the rationalization of extreme wealth. It shows us that extreme wealth is not incompatible with democracy. That it's a nice story, but it's time today that we understand that this is a dangerous mythology, that this is a childish fairy tale, that Bill Gates is the original tech bro oligarch, that we don't get Elon Musk without Bill Gates, that Elon Musk is standing on the shoulders of Bill Gates, that Bill Gates, no other political actor in the last 25 years has done more to normalize, institutionalize, and legitimize billionaire power in the body politic than Bill Gates. And the way he's done this is very clever. He does this through philanthropy. You use the word philanthropy and it has a short-circuiting effect on our cognition. It makes us think, well, there's nothing to see here. He's giving away all of his money. And what this mistakes is that he's not giving away money. He's buying influence. So in very real ways, Bill Gates is traveling around the world, meeting with elected leaders, and using his influence to shape national priorities and agendas and even spending, pushing independent sovereign nations around the world to change public policy to align with the ideas and the solutions that Bill Gates has privately come up with at his private foundation in Seattle. And an underappreciated dimension of this is the money that's involved, the public money. We think of oligarchy, we should be thinking of the ways that the super rich are feeding at the public trough. And we should understand that this too is happening with the Gates Foundation, where Gates can create these new organizations, these new public-private partnerships, these organizations that Gates says will revolutionize agriculture in Africa, or that will prevail upon a new era of vaccine access. So he can create these organizations. He can provide the seed money. He can take a seat on the board of directors. And then Bill Gates can go around the world and fundraise much of the money from us, taxpayers. So there's an enormous they're using public resources to subsidize Bill Gates' philanthropic career. It's an important part of understanding the oligarchy that Bill Gates presents. So Gates is inarguably one of the most powerful people in the world today. The news outlet Forbes for years had a list of the 10 most powerful people, and every year Bill Gates was on it. In a democracy, as I know it, we are supposed to scrutinize power and challenge power, not worship power and praise power. Why have we never really had an open, honest public debate about Bill Gates? Why do we insist on seeing him as an innocent humanitarian rather than interrogating the fact that he, in fact, is an unregulated political actor and an oligarch? It's time to understand that Gates is not categorically different than Elon Musk and other billionaires. They all endorse and enjoy the same oligarchic model of power, which is fundamentally this idea that the richest guy gets the loudest voice. And as a corollary to that we'll see with Gates's philanthropic career today, beggars can't be choosers. Arguably, Gates is an even more malevolent oligarchic figure than someone like Elon Musk, because with Elon Musk, we see him standing in the Oval Office. We see him standing next to Donald Trump. We immediately recognize that he's a political actor. With someone like Bill Gates, he hides his influence. He masks it under this halo of philanthropy. And it's made it very difficult and impossible in some areas to really understand what he's doing is not giving away money, but buying influence. And I think it would be naive for us to look at the next generation of tech billionaires, the Elon Musk, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezos, and to think that they won't follow in Bill Gates's footsteps. It would be naive because we can look at the incredible personal benefits that Bill Gates has taken from philanthropy. He gets this undemocratic political power, and he gets praised for exercising this political power. He gets reputational benefits. Before he launched his philanthropic career, Bill Gates was fairly stated one of the most vilified public figures on the face of the earth because he was the head of Microsoft, one of the world's most storied monopolies. So in a matter of a few short years, he totally transformed his reputation and became one of the most admired people. A next generation of tech billionaires is also going to understand the enormous tax benefits that they can take from philanthropy, and Bill Gates shows us this. And there's a few different ways this happens. In most jurisdictions, we reward billionaires for becoming philanthropists through tax breaks. In the United States, tax scholars say that every dollar a billionaire donates, up to 74 cents of that they would otherwise pay in taxes. So, you and I don't get to decide how 74% of our tax bill is spent. But this is a privilege and a right guaranteed only to the billionaire class, to the oligarchs. So it's really, again, an extraordinary taxpayer subsidy for billionaire philanthropy and for the oligarch class. Um, so if we don't squarely confront Gates, this is the future that we face, in which the Zuckerbergs and the Bezos and the Musk of the world decide, hey, I'm going to become a philanthropist. I'm going to protect the world from artificial intelligence. I'm going to solve climate change. I'm going to fix health and education. They can do so through philanthropy. And if we allow this world, it just means that we're descending further and further into oligarchy, into a world in which the richest guy gets the loudest voice. So if we are serious about challenging oligarchy, Bill Gates is perhaps the most significant case study we have to confront, because his oligarchic power is so far reaching, so institutionalized, so hidden, and so thoroughly misunderstood. When I wrote my book on the Gates Foundation, I was standing on the shoulders of giants, the researchers, the writers, and the activists who have been doing the hard work, often unpopular work, for decades of making the world pay attention to Bill Gates, to understand that he's not this innocent humanitarian. And today we're going to hear from four of those people who will tell us about Gates's influence over education, over public health, over agriculture, and over climate change, and who can testify to the damage and destruction that Gates has caused. Historically, Gates's critics working across these different fields haven't been talking to each other, even as they're making the same critiques. And that critique increasingly is that the Gates Foundation is doing more harm than good. We have 25 years of Bill Gates's philanthropic career. We can look back at that history and look at the evidence and show, not only is the Gates Foundation not only delivering on this idea that he's going to give us public benefits, but he's clearly causing more harm than good. The opportunity costs, the collateral damage are so keenly felt around the world that in some places, as we'll hear today, Gates's own intended beneficiaries are asking him to pay reparations for all the damage he's caused through his oligarchic money in politics model of philanthropy. So before we move to the panelists, let's briefly overview what are the criticisms that we hear about the Gates Foundation and his work in areas ranging from public health to public education to climate change to agriculture. Gates is a neoliberal. He approaches social problems through market-based solutions. He does things like bringing for-profit corporations, including many of the world's biggest monopoly. He wants them at the decision-making table. He believes that we can solve poverty and solve social problems and also make a profit. It hasn't worked and it won't work. Critics also cite Gates's fetish and fascination with technology, insisting that every problem needs a technological solution. And often these are solutions that are close to Microsoft's own interest. Gates is widely criticized for his dogmatic attachment to patents, the intellectual property that made Microsoft so powerful, that made Bill Gates so obscenely wealthy. These same ideas and ideologies also animate and energize his work at the Gates Foundation. And another criticism of Gates is his colonial power, how Bill Gates, a wealthy white American man, can acquire so much power, monopoly power in some places, over research and policymaking that affects the lives of billions of Black and brown people around the globe. But perhaps biggest picture, Gates is criticized and should be criticized for his hubris, for the oligarchic impulse that makes him believe that his obscene wealth entitles him to lead the world on any topic he wishes. So we can't confront the oligarch class without confronting Bill Gates. And to start our dialogue today, we'll start at home in the United States, where Bill Gates has used his great wealth to become one of the most powerful voices shaping U.S. education. And few people know this issue better than Jesse Hagopian. He's a writer, educator, activist, and author of the new book from Haymarket, Teach Truth: The Struggle for Anti-Racist Education. Jesse's been an educator for over 20 years and taught for over a decade at Seattle's Garfield High School. And he's even marched with students, parents, and teachers on the Gates Foundation's headquarters in Seattle. Jesse serves as the director of the Black Education Matter Student Activist Award and is an organizer with the Black Lives Matter at School movement. Jesse, the Gates Foundation has poured billions of dollars into reshaping public education, pushing standardized testing, teacher evaluations, charter school expansion, pushing wrong-headed ideas into public schools without meaningful input from teachers, students, or communities. What are the consequences of letting billionaires set national policy behind closed doors?
Yes, thank you for that question, Tim, and thank you for your brilliant research and your forthright confrontation with Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, and helping people really understand the insidious nature of his philanthrocapitalism. This is so important, and it's an honor to be on this panel with everybody else who can help expose the way he is manipulating public policy to help further enrich himself rather than support uh, people. And I believe that there has been no single force as destructive to public education as Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. He has used his immense wealth to impose a corporate style technocratic vision of education, one that really centers the standardization, the privatization, and top-down control with no meaningful input from educators, from students, or from the families that are most impacted. And a prime example of this is that Gates was the central force in driving the Common Core state standards, and he and his foundation spent over $200 million developing and promoting the Common Core, not through democratic debate, but by influencing governors, state boards, and policy networks behind closed doors. And Education Week blogger, science teacher Anthony Cody found that of the 25 individuals who worked to develop the Common Core standards, 6 were associated with test makers from the College Board, 5 were test publishers with the ACT, 4 were with Achieve, and there were zero educators. There was not a single teacher who was part of the group that was developing the standards that would be what all kids in the US were supposed to be taught. And I want to be clear about something. He spent all of that money on standardizing what kids learn, but not on art programs and music programs, school counselors or psychologists, wraparound services, the things that we know actually improve the lives and education of our children. And why did he do this? Why did he take this approach? Well, he explained it himself. I want to share his words so you can get a little peek behind the curtain, so you can understand how the logic in his head works. He said this, quote, "If you have 50 different plug types, appliances wouldn't be available and would be very expensive. But once an electric outlet becomes standardized, many companies can design appliances and competition ensues." That was his explanation for why we needed the Common Core in education. And that's absolutely brilliant analysis if our kids were toasters, okay? But our kids are not. They're living, breathing human beings with diverse needs and cultures and ways of learning. And since our students aren't standardized, neither should their education or the assessments they take. And in Gates's worldview, education becomes really just infrastructure for the market, not a human right, not a space for joy or liberation. And the goal of Common Core wasn't to improve learning, it was to standardize children so companies could scale up ed tech products, standardize tests, and textbooks. And we see the impact. The average student today in the United States public school system now takes an outlandish 112 standardized tests throughout their K-12 career. This has nothing to do with assessment. This has everything to do with enriching what I call the testocracy, the testing companies that are profiting off of our children. And there's a deeper issue at play here. It's not just about standardizing education. It's about using that standardization for a larger push for privatization, especially through charter school expansion. And the Network for Public Education has documented this relentlessly. They've showed how Gates-backed charter initiatives have diverted public funds into private hands with little transparency and really what we could call shocking failure rates. Nearly 1 in 3 federally funded charter schools either never opened or closed shortly after, right? And this is what happens when billionaires set education policy. Schools are reshaped to serve markets, not children. Education becomes a delivery system for products, not a democratic institution for thinking, for dreaming, for building just futures, right? Charter schools are privately managed but funded with public funds, right? And this is their dream for education. But if we're serious about justice, we have to organize not just against Gates's policies, but as you alluded to, we have to organize against the larger system of oligarchic power that allows billionaires to override democracy, because we are living in one of the most unequal periods in human history. I saw one study that shows 8 people hold as much wealth as the bottom half of humanity. And this ultra rich elite shape everything from education to climate policy to healthcare, as we're going to talk about today. And so I'll just end by saying that Bill Gates's unaccountable wealth and unearned influence has allowed him to amass a fortune, to reshape public institutions according to his private vision, and he has spent billions really experimenting on the education of poor children, of black and brown children, while sending his own kids to elite private schools. And you know, I agree with what the amazing labor leader, and socialist, Eugene Debs said when he declared, "I'm opposing a social order in which it is possible for one man who does absolutely nothing that is useful to amass a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars, while millions of men and women who work all the days of their lives secure barely enough for a wretched existence." And I believe Debs may as well have been talking directly about Bill Gates. But the larger point is that if we want justice, we have to challenge not just Gates, but the entire system that gives billionaires the power to override democracy.
Absolutely, Jesse. Thank you so much for that response. The same way that we see Gates, who was not elected or appointed to any political power over public education, yet there he is at the decision-making table. We see the same unfortunate scenario unfolding in public education. And before we pivot to this, we're going to show a brief clip, I hope, from University of Washington Global Health professor Steve Gloyd, who, like Jesse Hagopian, generously took time out of their schedules to show up at a book event I did in Seattle. And Steve Gloyd tells this amazing anecdote about the way that the Gates Foundation has used its political influence as a political actor to, in some cases, actually obstruct access to pharmaceuticals. Do we have that clip?
Develop programs to start treating these folks with HIV who would otherwise be dying in a couple of years. And the Gates Foundation representative on the board decided to push preventive care and was absolutely against treatment for a very large number of countries, including Mozambique, where I'd worked. And the Mozambique rep to this group basically told me that they had a very well-developed plan for universal treatment of HIV, and it was completely nixed by the Gates representation and the Global Fund because they had so much influence. I was pretty upset about that, and so I called the Gates Foundation head at that point, a guy who was a personal friend, and I asked him, what was going on here? Why would the Gates Foundation, when the money exists, when the drugs exist, why would they go against a country that had a very viable plan for universal treatment? And his response was very quick, and he said, "Bill has an absolute resistance to any infringements on patents." And my personal estimate, which is just a guesstimate of the influence of that particular decision, was that somewhere in the hundreds of thousands or millions of people didn't make it through that year until finally things changed and treatment was available. So what Bill Gates does in terms of his policymaking on the basis of the fact that he has so much leverage and so much power and so many organizations has real effects that make a difference.
It's an extraordinary anecdote that Steve Gloyd brings us from his time working in Mozambique, where you could have an independent sovereign nation developing its own plan about how to solve this public health crisis, HIV and AIDS. The plan is in place, the money is in place, and the Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation can step in and change the course of history. The Gates Foundation loves to talk about the lives it's saving. It's time now to talk about the lives that are being lost and how many more lives we could save if we had a more democratically organized approach to public health and other public policies. And it's important also to understand there was an encore performance of the Gates Foundation had the next major public health crisis that took over the globe, the COVID pandemic crisis in 2020. And to talk about that today, Nicoletta Dentico. She's a journalist and a writer who leads the Global Health Justice Program at the Society for International Development. She co-chairs the Geneva Global Health Hub, an independent platform of civil society organizations working on global health justice. She's written extensively on health rights and development. Her most recent books are Rich and Generous, The Dark Weft of Philanthrocapitalism, and Health Politics, COVID-19, WHO, and the Pandemic Challenges. Nicoletta, during the pandemic, Gates actively opposed efforts to waive monopoly patents over COVID vaccines. Gates chose instead to partner with Big Pharma and promote a market-based distribution. He promised that his network of power, his work with the WHO, with the NIH, with Big Pharma, with ministers of health all over the world, he argued that he alone was positioned to solve this problem, and he would deliver vaccine equity. Instead, his plan presided over what became known as vaccine apartheid. What does this tell us about the deeper mythology that Gates is selling, that life-saving medicines can be solved, can be delivered through corporate partnerships?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.
Sorry, Nicoletta. If all panelists could also keep a timer on and limit it to 3 to 4 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your work, for the work you did. Thank you for having me in this amazing panel. And thank to all of the organizers for setting the stage of this fundamental, indispensable conversation. Now, let me start with this. Bill Gates was literally the only one person on earth ready and equipped to face the new coronavirus. He had performed his pandemic prophecy in 2015. Since then, he has used his billionaire capacity to forge a web of investments in the pharmaceutical sector to secure his grip in the future production of pandemic-related vaccines and the ownership of the patents concerned. That's where his violent and network opposition to the temporary suspension of patent monopolies during COVID-19, which, by the way, is a clause of international law, which had a lot of support during the pandemic. That's where his opposition comes from, of course, on top of all you said that patents can never be infringed. He built his fortune on patent monopolies. Now, all this situation patently proves, behind the mythology, as you said, the true nature of Gates' global health agenda. It is health redefined through a very rigid hierarchy of rights based on race, wealth, knowledge, class, and geographies. That's exactly the opposite of health for all advocated by the WHO. Gates has steered the most important global health partnerships created by him, of course, in the decades of occupation of the global health sphere to be at the forefront of any global engagement. So the creation of what I call the Gates cartel started well before COVID-19. But recent academic research has demonstrated how, in the case of the COVID-19, the Gates Foundation tentacular presence in Europe, its bureaucratized and institutionalized engagement, particularly with European states, has enabled Bill Gates to orchestrate the health response to the COVID pandemic with practically no scrutiny, no public scrutiny, no public oversight, as we have learned from very serious media investigations during the pandemic. Yes, so for the first time in history, the management of a global health crisis has been taken over by one powerful private actor whose market-driven visible hand has misguided and highly financialized in so many ways. I don't have here the opportunity to elaborate the response to a public health crisis. It's a staggering precedent. Despite the serious flaws in the COVID response, Gates' network diplomacy continues. It goes on and it operates while negotiations over a pandemic treaty are going on at the WHO. Moreover, Trump's exit from the WHO is currently bankrolling new opportunities for Gates' opium of charity. After all, health has been Gates' first love, perhaps coming after the education in the US. I mean, it's the first international love, let's put it this way. Health has been the experimental ground through which he has progressively transfigured, I'd rather say disfigured health, and the entire development agenda, actually. The nonsensical global health governance that he has advanced in over 2 decades has produced several pathologies. Let me just conclude naming a few of them. First one, an uncontrolled proliferation of actors and a very mediocre global health leadership, mostly formed by cheerleaders who would never dare to question Gates, from whom they depend scientifically, institutionally, and financially. Second, national health administration have been reshaped to serve vertical disease programs, which steer health only and exclusively towards technical biomedical solutionisms and the centrality of pharma products. Three, global health partnerships have morphed into decision makers, like states, at the national and international level. They actually sit in the rooms of the WHO next to member states today. So he has shaped a sort of oligarchy corporate governance with serious disempowering effects for countries in the global south. National capacity in 25 years have been completely overhauled. Finally, a denial of reality. Health systems have been completely left behind. Social determinants of health do not exist in Gates' kind of worldview. The reality of debt service payments eating up national health spending, even during the pandemic, does not exist for Gates, and it has always been pushed away, pushed aside in all health policy conversations, too political, too transformative. This is not what Gates wants.
Thank you, Nicoletta. We will now pivot. We've gone from public education to public health. Now let's look at the Gates Foundation's work with food, how he's managed to become one of the most powerful voices shaping African agriculture. And his primary vehicle for power on the African continent is a public-private partnership he created called AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. AGRA insists that it's an independent African organization, but many African farmer groups say it is a front of the Gates Foundation or a surrogate. The Gates Foundation provides most of the money. The Gates Foundation sits on its board of directors. No one knows this issue better than Gabriel Manyangatse. He's the Food and Climate Justice Coordinator of SAFSI, the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, a multi-faith environmental justice organization. SAFSI supports leaders and their faith communities across Southern Africa to raise awareness, build skills, and take decisive action on eco-justice, sustainable living, and climate justice. Gabriel also acts as the programs director of the Zimbabwe Councils of Churches. Gabriel, welcome. How would you describe Gates's approach to agriculture in Africa, not just in theory, but on the ground, but in practice? You know, what are the on-the-ground consequences for smallholder farmers where his initiatives are being implemented? And if all speakers again could try and limit their responses to 3 to 4 minutes, Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim, for allowing me to speak on this subject. To answer the first question on how I would describe the approach, I would say that it is a presumptive approach, one that takes care of one end of business, which is mainly that is supportive of the business entities that are into the food systems. The control of seeds, the control of fertilizers, the control of pesticides, all of which are chemically based pesticides and chemicals and fertilizers. This is a point where we see that there was very little, if any, consultation with the people that matter most, the people that are listed in the documents that AGRA posts even on their websites. The smallholder farmer. The smallholder farmer was meant to be the beneficiary of the whole program. But as we look at it, the headline success of AGRA comes in the enactment of policies and laws. And as we come closer to analyze those policies and laws, we realize that most of the laws are actually working against the smallholder farmer. The criminalization of the sharing of seeds and the selling of seeds that are regarded as uncertified, seeds that have worked for the farmers for a long time, some of which have also been adapting to the conditions of Africa over thousands of years, now are being deemed not to be suitable to the farmer who has been using these seeds over time. We also realize that the communities where the seeds originate from would come together and collectively work together and support each other, and because they know of their situation. But the interventions that we see do not recognize the kind of work that people have been doing on the ground. And because of that, now we have the Green Revolution coming in with hybrid seeds that are owned by multinational corporations who have no idea of what is actually happening on the ground. So it is important for us to note that the Gates Foundation through AGRA actually headlined that they were going to make people have greater profits through the food that they were going to be growing. But their interventions from the researches and from the evaluations that have been shared have failed to cut out on poverty. They have failed to remove hunger from Africa because their approach was presumptive. It did not involve the people that matter most. Right now, some of the people that are involved in this highly industrialized and chemically driven agriculture are now suffering because of debt. They went into a profit scheme for those that would benefit most. And these are the chemical companies, the fertilizer companies, and the seed companies. And when you have a look at it, we only have about 6 of the major seed companies that have benefited most out of the work that AGRA is doing. And what else do we see in AGRA's work in Africa? We see an inconsideration of the biodiversity of Africa. When chemicals are used indiscriminately, as we see maybe in most of the industrial agriculture that was forced down on those that participated in the program, you find that there are places and farms which can now not be recovered as far as natural farming is concerned, because they've been using chemicals heavily. The pollution of rivers, the pollution of the biomes in the different places where fertilizers and herbicides are heavily used. All these have not been factored as part of the cost that the African farmer is having to bear as they struggle to get out of the clutch of the industrial agriculture. So in brief, we are saying the impact is devastating. And we are also expanding the dead soils in Africa because of the use of chemicals in all the agricultural activities that are being carried out. We call on the authorities to help to revert to agroecology, to support the farmers to live with the earth. As people of faith, we say all creation matter. It doesn't matter where it is, but we know that all creation should work in harmony and to create ecosystems that are supportive of each other. But with the expansion of industrial agriculture, we see the decimation of our biodiversity in Africa through the heavy usage of chemicals. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Gabriel. The same failures that we see today in public and Gates's work in public education and public health and agricultural development, we also see in climate change. And today to speak on this topic is Anuradha Mittal. She's the founder and executive director of the Oakland Institute, an internationally recognized, internationally renowned expert on issues of human rights, agriculture, development, and conservation policies. Under Anuradha's leadership, the Oakland Institute has unveiled land investment deals in the developing world to expose a disturbing pattern of a lack of transparency, fairness, and accountability. Anuradha Gates has recently tried to center himself as a leader on climate change. He published a book. He's meeting with government leaders. He's spending billions of dollars to launch new technologies that he insists are the only way to solve climate change. And his approach to climate change is about reducing emissions through innovation. It seems very much at odds with the sort of social and political movements looking for systemic changes, like the Green New Deal or food sovereignty campaigns. What can you tell us about Gates's obsession with techno fixes, and what effects is Gates having as he bullies his ideas into the spotlight? And a quick note before you start, Anuradha, we are going to have a public Q&A at the end of this, so we're hoping to reserve time. So if all the panelists could time themselves and keep responses to 3-4 minutes, Anuradha, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tim, Jesse, Nicoletta, and Gabriel. It's been fascinating and very educational to hear you all. Tim, when you started this session, you said Bill Gates, you kind of suggested he maintains the golden rule. Who has the gold makes the rule. So let us be very clear that this is not about us having different perspectives, opinions, or what is sometimes painted as fear of Luddites against technology. This is about Gates' desire to maintain control, power, and white supremacy. We know how to solve hunger. We know how to solve climate crisis, and that we need to figure out how to get rid of those in power who prevent that from happening. And this is what Bill Gates is afraid of, because this can change the status quo. With his immense wealth, he claims to have answers to hunger, to climate crisis, but they are really ways to maintain the current world order. So the power remains with those who have the wealth. This is not about changing anything. This is really about maintaining the colonial paradigm. So instead of approaches rooted in systemic change for the crisis we face, for which justice is essential, he has used his power to distract us with technological solutions while gaining access and control over the world. I mean, when you think of it, Gates Foundation, a private charity, striking deals, entering partnerships with governments, international institutions, all of this fuels his ego as well as his coffers, as other panelists have pointed out. So, what he has offered are false solutions, distracting policy and budgets from real solutions. So, let's not forget his technological solution to hunger, as Gabriel just pointed out, is promotion of industrial agriculture, genetic engineering, which is based on fossil fuel based herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, which are responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. All of this when we know that we produce enough food to feed everyone. The problem is not one of production, but man made inequality, exploitation, and injustice. He then chimes in to offer technological solutions for climate crisis that he is actually worsening. In 2015, he founded Breakthrough Energy, a so-called sustainable energy investment firm that seeks to change the way we live, we eat, work, travel, and make things so we can avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. Now, this firm is backed by high profile billionaires such as Bezos, Jack Ma, Richard Branson, Michael Bloomberg, whose carbon footprint far exceeds that of nations. So, Breakthrough Energy is a major investor, for instance, in Cobalt Metals, a Berkeley based mining company that is using AI to find mineral deposits, and is one of the firms that will benefit from the so called peace agreement that Trump has announced for tomorrow between the United States and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So basically, Gates' philanthropy can be best described as philanthropy for himself and other oligarchs, private equity firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, and financial forces that are the cause of climate crisis, wars, and hunger. So till we are freed from their clutches, they will wield power of money to seize more money and power. I would end by saying, we very often feel that we have the burden of proof to show that Gates' solutions will not solve hunger or will not solve climate crisis. Actually, the burden of proof is on Bill Gates himself and the Gates Foundation that they are not responsible for the global hunger, for the climate crisis that is worsening, and they should be held accountable.
Amazing, Anuradha. You kept it under 3 minutes, and I found myself involuntarily nodding to everything you said. Let's turn back to public health and talk to Nicoletta. Let's talk about the Gates Foundation mechanics of power, how he buys influence by funding so many different organizations, which become like surrogates for him. The Gates Foundation has become a leading funder of the World Health Organization, which is part of the United Nations. He's also created and helped fund an array of powerful public-private partnerships like the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations and the Global Fund. What does it mean for the world that a single private billionaire can be one of the most powerful voices shaping public health priorities for billions of people around the globe?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm in Brussels where Bill Gates is today, because today they are having the Gavi replenishment fund, and I can see all these cheers and this praise of the great philanthropist who saves the world. It's really disgusting. Anyway, yes, as you said, Tim, since 2015, Gates has been either the first or the second contributor of the World Health Organization. Now, currently, he is the first one. And of course, Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccine Immunization, one of his creatures, is the third funder. So we can say that the WHO is gated, actually. It is completely trapped into the power of Gates. We know that entire WHO departments, vaccine, malaria, polio, are exclusively funded by Gates and his initiative. And in Geneva, actually, if you are not funded by Gates, by the Gates Foundation, you are, in a way, the child of a lesser god. Your credibility in health is very much questioned. So this is how the Seattle Dominion has really imposed itself in town. Gates' influence extends or stretched through the positioning of Gates Foundation people. Several of them have been either seconded or they have transitioned to the WHO top position. And the same goes to other multilateral organizations like the World Bank or the many initiatives that keep propping up, like Pandemic Fund and others. Gates has also recently surfaced in the wake of the US withdrawal of the WHO, which of course is a choice, is a decision that has affected significantly the WHO. Media investigations have actually found that bypassing WHO's regulations for managing private actors, Bill Gates has directly footed the bill of the Boston Consulting Group, which is the firm currently tasked with redesigning the WHO after the Trump withdrawal. Once again, with no member states' knowledge or approval, once again, with no member states' oversight. Power goes, of course, through a very narcissistic charity narrative, which is attractive. It seems almost irresistible. I myself had a bit to struggle when writing the book because, you tend to kind of believe it. And it has been interiorized by many in the global north and in the global south. It has lured several NGOs and civil society entities who have, in a way, undressed themselves of any political aspiration and transformative vision. And it must be said, they have become mere implementers of the Gates vision. Legions of them populate the WHO, and they actually are those that look at the finger, but they never look at the moon. Ultimately, Gates' power is exercised through his impenetrable interaction with key individuals and institutions that were already networks in webs of politics and finance. We are talking of a gender, white man, and the geographies, no global north, convergence of power, which designs global health initiatives that not only limit political oversight, as we have mentioned already, but also ring fence public money by foreclosing alternative policy options that are available to governments. Such is the case, for example, of the financialized and unregulated schemes of the vaccine bonds, the pandemic bonds, which Gavi is launching in this future of pandemics, where the cost of taxpayers in the north is considerable, and the cost in terms of lives lost for the people, the patients in the global south, is huge.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta. Gabriel, or Nicoletta mentioned, she talked about Geneva, which is home to the small campus of all of these powerful global health organizations, which together are organizing the public health of poor people around the globe. And in my research, what I did is I looked at follow the money, where the Gates Foundation's money is going. And the largest destination of Gates Foundation money is in Geneva, Switzerland. The second largest is in Washington, D.C. Gates has a very colonial approach to philanthropy. It's working with and through organizations in the global north to parachute in consultants and experts and technical experts into the global south to solve these problems. I want to ask Gabriel. Gabriel, if I'm not mistaken, you're joining us today from Zimbabwe. How important is this theme of colonialism, to your critique of the Gates Foundation? Bill Gates is this white technologist in Seattle, but he's this powerful voice over African agriculture. What can you say about colonialism? We can't hear you, Gabriel.
Thank you, Tim. As we look at the approach that is used by the Gates Foundation coming into Africa, we see a colonial mentality where there is more of an extraction of resources from Africa, even through agriculture. Extraction of whatever money that is found in Africa. When we have maybe donations that are directed towards the development of African agriculture. But as you have already pointed out, with experts that are based outside of Africa, meaning whatever money is meant to be coming to Africa will find its way back to where it is coming from. And also we would see that the wealth that is supposedly created in Africa does not remain in Africa, but because of the hybrid seed companies that are coming into Africa, the money gets back to where it would have come from. And not only does it go back, but at a huge profit with the farmers who have been exploited because they are forced to buy seed year in and year out. Whereas the one system that they are criminalizing, the one where we would grow our own farmer-managed seeds, would have sustained the lives of the farmers. They would have kept the greater part of their wealth by not having to buy seeds year in and year out. And most of the seeds that they are forced to buy are dependent on the chemical fertilizers, on the artificial fertilizers that are forced on them. They are also supposed to be grown very well by use of herbicides such as glyphosate. All these are not meant to serve the African farmer. They are meant to serve the seed companies. They are meant to serve the chemical companies. They are meant to serve those companies that are servicing and the ones that have also got the rights to supply seeds, the right to supply chemicals. And some of the chemicals which are also finding their way into Africa are those chemicals that are already banned in Europe, banned in the United States of America, but they're being manufactured in the same countries and meant only for Africa and no other place, which shows the colonial mentality of destroying Africa and extracting whatever they can get out of Africa, and also creating money into the foundations, which is then taken back to their respective countries. So when we are looking at this aspect of Agra work and the Gates Foundation work, we find that a food system that does not include taking care of the environment and biodiversity is the one that is finding its way into Africa. A system that is imposed through the extractive nature of operation and then the support of the people in Africa. It does not recognize the indigenous knowledge systems of Africa. And at times it even defies the good science that is supposed to be helping the people of Africa, because they are imposing the science that damages the environment. And added to that, I've already pointed out on the issue of the policies. The people who are coming in as experts are those that have a mentality to support only ways and technologies that are brought about by the same companies who are the beneficiaries of selling the seeds and selling the chemicals. And therefore, they want to ban and to criminalize the use of indigenous seeds, the use of local seeds, which are farmer managed, which are cheaper but very effective and well adapted to the conditions of Africa and the communities where these are grown. And as was also pointed out, some of these seeds which are now being patented are
Gabriel, we're
seeds.
at time. We're at time. Can we wrap up, please?
Thank you. The seeds that have been taken out of the communities are the ones that now come in as patented seeds, and in the end, they are sold at a higher price. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Powerful story about Gates's beggars can't be choosers ethos. Let's bring the conversation back to the United States and look at what Bill Gates has done under Donald Trump. Under pressure from right-wing activists, the Gates Foundation announced that it changed the scholarship program it had designed for students of color to now welcome white kids. Now, this follows a series of meetings Bill Gates has had with Donald Trump, after which he effusively praised the president as how impressed he was with him. So I think these episodes illustrate how morally flexible Gates is and how eagerly his foundation capitulates to the ascendant political right. But it also illustrates how historically much of Gates's work in U.S. education has focused on poor Black and brown children in public schools, unlike Gates's own children, as you mentioned, Jesse, who went to the most elite private school in Seattle. And then they went to the most elite private universities around the world. Jesse, how do you see race and control operating through his top-down education reforms? And what would a racially just, student-centered alternative look like?
Yes. Well, I just want to follow Gabriel by saying that whether in Africa or in the US public schools, Bill Gates advances a model of neo-colonialism, right? One where wealth confers the right to dictate other people's futures. So abroad, he imposes top-down health and agriculture schemes on African nations without democratic accountability. And at home, he does the same thing in education, using his fortune to reshape public schools in Black and brown communities through standardized testing, privatization, charter school expansion, and the rest of it. And in both cases, the message is clear that he is sending us. Communities don't need self-determination, they need guidance of billionaires. And really, that's not philanthropy, that's colonial control by another name. And I'm from Seattle. I was born and raised here, and I went to the public schools here, and I've spent my life teaching in the public schools here. Bill Gates went to Lakeside, an elite private school in Seattle. He sent his own children there too. Lakeside is known for its small class sizes, its opulent libraries, its thriving arts and music programs, its rich extracurriculars like the Ethics Bowl, its outdoor leadership courses, its international travel opportunities. This is what Bill Gates believes quality education looks like for his kids. But for our kids, for Black and brown and working class children, he has pushed a radically different vision. It's a stripped down, standardized test driven model, and it reduces the intellectual and emotional process of teaching and learning to a single data point. He wants to convince us that wisdom is the ability to eliminate a wrong answer choice, not to think critically. But for his children, education is creativity, exploration, and joy. For our children, it's compliance, it's surveillance, it's remediation. And he has the audacity to call that justice. You know, he talks about education being the civil rights movement of our time. But when we look at how his policies have played out and who they've targeted, it becomes clear this has never been about equity, it's been about control. And I'll just end by saying that he has been absolutely absent and missing in the conversation around the censorship of education. We've seen Donald Trump ban uh, the ability to learn about Black history. He wants to defund schools that teach the truth about systemic racism and Black history. And Gates has been loud for decades on education. And now all of a sudden, he has not a mumbling word to say about the criminalization of teaching the truth about our nation's history. That tells you everything you need to know about his priorities and about what he really thinks about Black and brown children. We need to reject that kind of control. We need to build a racially just, student-centered movement where schools serve furthering democracy, not oligarchy.
Absolutely. We've spent the most of this panel today talking about the problems of the Gates Foundation. Now let's talk about the solutions. And to this, I want to turn back to Gabriel. Your organization has joined with many others across the African continent, explicitly calling on the Gates Foundation to pay reparations for the enormous damage it's caused to farms. It is stunning that the Gates Foundation's own intended beneficiaries today are asking the foundation to stop its philanthropic crusade and to repair the damage they've done. And it is stunning also that Bill Gates will not engage with these calls. He won't listen, that he insists on this top-down idea that beggars can't be choosers, and that apparently Africans are not sophisticated enough to solve their own problems. Can we talk, Gabriel, about this call for reparations? How did it come about, and what would real accountability look like? We are definitely over time, so if you could keep it short, even though this is so important, Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim. On that note, maybe from the substance perspective, from the faith community's perspective, we say it is natural call for us to actually say when things do not go right, when communities suffer, those who are responsible should also come up and support the recovery and the restoration of those whom they have harmed. And it is with that principle that we are also calling the Gates Foundation, the fact that they supported AGRA in bringing in the industrial green revolution. We are saying and calling out to the same Gates Foundation to say, please come in and fix that which you also caused. And therefore would want them to come in and support the smallholder farmer to embark on their natural journey of natural farming, on agroecology, on supporting the environment, on supporting food that is nutritious, on supporting food that any normal person within the communities can also have access to, on supporting the growth of food system which can be controlled at a local level, one which does not always suffer the impact of the global shocks as we have seen in the past with COVID and also the war in Ukraine. We need to have AGRA to abandon their way of dealing with the green revolution issues and support agroecological practices that are within the communities, to let farmers have their own seed, and also to scrap the policies that they continue to support which are affecting the farmers. So would want the removal of artificial petrochemical fertilizers and the restoration of the damaged land and the use of agroecology as a way to go, using indigenous knowledge systems as well as good science that supports the environment and the biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Jesse, you've described for us how destructive Gates' influence has been over education policy in the United States. Do you think that Gates has a responsibility to repair the harms he's caused? Should he be asked to pay reparations?
Absolutely. Bill Gates not only has a moral responsibility to repair the harms he's caused in education, but he owes reparations, especially to Black children. Gates invested billions in reforms that have eliminated arts programs, music programs, counseling, culturally responsive teaching, and essential resources in underfunded schools, right? Because of all the policies he's pushed around high stakes testing, that has pushed out all these other programs that enrich education. And this has harmed our children, and our children are owed. You know, there was a study that came out in 2019, a report from EdBuild that showed predominantly white school districts receive over 23 billion more in funding each year than districts serving mostly students of color. And that's not just a gap in funding, that is theft. And despite his enormous influence and wealth, Gates has done nothing to address that gap, the real problem facing education. Instead, he's used his power and influence to intensify that gap. And that harm isn't just symbolic, it's structural, it's generational, and it's measurable. Dr. Bettina Love, uh, and, you know, she worked with a team of Black economists and scholars. They worked to discover how much Black children are owed in the education system. And they, after meticulously researching, they found Black kids are owed 1.5 to $2 trillion over the past 40 years for the underfunding of their schools, and for the curriculum exclusion, the degradation of school environments, the criminalization of Black and brown children in the schools. And so this is about acknowledging that Bill Gates helped build a system that damaged millions, and now he has a duty to dismantle that and support the building of something liberatory in its place. But we know that he's not going to just fork over money to be democratically decided by school boards and communities how to use that money, because he doesn't really believe in democracy. So we know it's going to take a struggle to fight not just Gates but the billionaire class, to make sure that they uh, uh, come out of their wealth and that we can democratically use their wealth. And I point to groups like the Chicago Teachers Union, who has partnered with the UAW to make a call for a general strike in 2028. And they are working with unions across America to try to change the balance of class forces and end this one-sided class war that's been waged for decades under the banner of neoliberalism, that's been used to attack educators and students and schools. And we need this fight for a general strike in order to show that working people have power, that we can shut down their system like the Red State Revolt showed, when teachers shut down the school systems all across red states, and we can fight for the funding that our children deserve.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Anuradha, let me ask you about reparations. In some of the reporting I've done, other journalists have discovered that Bill Gates is the largest farmland holder in the United States. Among the many other things Bill Gates owns, he owns a lot of farmland, and it's been proposed, I've heard critics say that he should give up that farmland holdings as an act of reparations. How does reparations factor into your idea of accountability and how to confront Bill Gates and oligarchy?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, it was almost a decade ago when at the Oakland Institute, we sounded the alarm that nearly half of the farmland in the United States will be changing hands. And more recently, it is predicted that more than $24 trillion worth of farmland and farming assets will change hands in the next 20 years. Now, this is not land and assets staying with the farming families. It is really the tech and the private equity billionaires like Gates who are taking control of land in the United States. Not because they know farming, their ownership is basically driven by the wealth that they have come to control and own. So this is destroying the culture of agriculture. It has destroyed the relationship with land. And this is the model that they're exporting to the rest of the world, a model made in the United States, where nearly 90% of the poorest counties in the country are rural counties. Most families in the US, in the rural US counties, they rely on more than one job to make ends meet. We can take the example of Tulare or Fresno in California, incredibly productive agricultural regions, but they face persistent hunger. Tulare has poverty rate, which is nearly double the national average. So exporting this model of agriculture, this failed food system to Africa is immoral, it is wrong. It is about continuing this colonial program of control and extraction of lands and territories which have been stewarded by the wisdom of the indigenous. So Gates, it's obvious as it has been said, should be made to acknowledge his wrongs and he should be held accountable. We need to start with the process of acknowledging the truth, harms caused by these false solutions that have been pushed through the global south. And I say global south because, as we have heard from Jesse, the harms caused to the brown black communities in the United States is in some ways the same as what's happening across Africa through the abuse and misuse of Gates' power and money. His wealth has been accumulated through seizure and erasure of the indigenous and local knowledge. It should be owned by the world he has harmed. I would just add and say we cannot expect, as has been pointed out by him, to do the right thing. It's like hoping the bank robber will guard the bank. What we really need to do is dismantle the supremacy and the wealth of these individuals and institutions they have built because they're morally corrupt. But more important, they should be classified as being illegal, illegitimate, that have no credibility to be allowed to maintain the power they have.
Absolutely. When we allow anyone to acquire these kinds of obscene sums of money, we know how they will always use it, which is to take political power. There is no such thing as a good billionaire. Whether you use philanthropy or campaign contributions or lobbying, extreme wealth is incompatible with democracy. Nicoletta, let's talk about how public health, how reparations could play into public health. In public health, you don't have like a teachers union or a farmers advocacy group. Poor patients around the world maybe don't have an advocate, but if they did, what might they say about reparations, or what is your view? Should Gates repair the harms that he's caused in public health for poor people around the globe?
Well, yes, of course, the health community, unlike the food and the climate crowd, is very weak. It's divided by diseases. It is really very conformist. Also, it has been largely conformed by the global health partnerships that are the main financer, the main funders of health in the world. Therefore, I think, of course, that there should be reparations, but I tend to agree with Anuradha that, yes, reparations are important, but how do you make actually, Gates accountable, and how do you force Gates to do some sort of reparations? I think this is something that we will have to explore, to study, because there are millions of people whose health has been damaged by the standardization of Gates. And I think the problem is also that the politicization of health, which happened with the HIV/AIDS activism, is a kind of a glorious moment of the past. We haven't seen that for any other disease. We haven't seen that for COVID. So the picture is kind of difficult for health, but we need to work. We should work. We need to work. And also taking advantage of the many, lines of research that have been conducted during the COVID and after COVID now by scholars, by journalists, investigative journalism, and also by other research, civil society researchers. I think also governments have to be involved, because at the end of the day, we have you can't really make a lion vegetarian. You have to do something to actually make the lion accountable. And this is tough. I mean, one of the things that we did in the past, and we means my organization, Society for International Development, and Navdan International, which has done a lot of work on gates, was to start conceptualizing how the legal framework, how the normative framework, how international law can be applied to gates. It's not an easy answer that we have here. Our initial pathway was to resort to the Permanent People Tribunal, first to create this grassroots movement across the thematic areas, which is the beauty of this webinar, that we are not silos here. We're talking, and we see that the diagnosis is the same. So the Permanent People Tribunal has an established procedure to also, supported by international jurists. So we have to talk, we have to research, we have to work on this. It must be possible. This feudalism needs to be challenged, and we need to really work. I think the fact that COVID stopped our work and that the funding for this work is very difficult to get will not kind of, disengage us at all. I think today's conversation, the webinar today, is a real event, not just for me, but for the people in our pathway that are here today. So we do not want to give up. And the conversation we are having today is a very promising step forward, re-energizing the intention anew, and also to create a new sense of togetherness, because I really think that there are no competitions here. We have to cooperate, to work in solidarity. It's not an easy fight. It's an uphill fight. It's a power play, but we need, as Jesse said, to basically change the balance of class forces. It's a class fight.
Thank you to all the panelists. We have a few minutes, maybe about 10 minutes to move to public questions. One of the questions coming in is, why doesn't the media cover this issue? We have this incredible panel today that is this robust debate about the Gates Foundation paying reparations. So why is the news media telling us the same story ad nauseum about Gates's big donations, his grand ambitions, the millions of lives he's saving? Why aren't the voices of the brilliant speakers on today's panels, why are they not front and center at every article written about the Gates Foundation? So I'll tee this up because I'm a journalist. I wrote a book about the Gates Foundation that landed in a media landscape that is larded with funding from the Gates Foundation. I mean, this is part and parcel of Gates's incredible philanthropic power, is that he can donate the money to anyone and everyone. He's donating money to newsrooms, to think tanks, to universities, even to government agencies. And academic researchers have coined this term, this idea of the bill chill, the chilling effect that you invariably have once you take funding from Gates or hope to get funded in the future. You become afraid to bite the hand that feeds you. That's my take on why the media doesn't cover this issue. I don't know if anyone else wants to take a stab at that, either about media bias around the Gates Foundation, how to fix media bias, or just more generally how Gates can fund any and every organization, whether it's in education or health or climate or agriculture. He can bring the news agencies, the think tanks, the advocacy groups. He doesn't have absolute power. Here we are speaking truth to power, but he does have very significant power to bring in so many different voices into his sort of under his umbrella. Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
I'll jump in very quickly to affirm some of the points that you made. Here in Seattle, the Seattle Times education reporting and education department is called Education Lab, and it is fully funded by Bill Gates. So why do we think that all of the things that I've said about education are not being exposed in the Seattle Times? Because they're bought and paid for by Bill Gates. I did manage to make it onto Education Nation, which was a nationally broadcast program that included people like Secretary of Education Arne Duncan and many other corporate education reformers. And this was at a time when the revolt against standardized testing was at a fever pitch, and more families were opting their kids out of standardized tests than ever before. And because my high school had participated in launching that movement, I got an invitation to be on NBC, and I directly went after Bill Gates, and the moderators were very uncomfortable that on his own news network I was pointing out his destructive role in education, and I was never invited back. And they took down the clip of what I said from the website, right? So this is how they control the narrative. And yet we can bust through that through grassroots organizing and make our demands heard. I did get on MSNBC because we had a national movement of thousands of people protesting, and we have to bring that back.
Tim, if I may add, we were told by, I've been told by media where the Gates Foundation clearly said if we will be debating her, we will not debate. And it's really, as you said, who has the money, they control, whether it's schools of journalism, whether it's newspapers, or whether it is, any kind of debate that can happen. And if their arguments were that sound, they would be willing to debate any one of us, but they don't.
I'm looking at questions here. Ashka Naik asks, will reparations be enough? Although urgently necessary, how can future harm from Gates' empire be prevented and they be held legal liable for their crimes against humanity? Are the courts even equipped to take on Gates? Some of this gets kind of procedural, and Nicoletta, you started to tee this up. Technically, it's one thing to make a public call for reparations, but technically, how do you do it? And if anyone has thoughts on that. Or maybe a more provocative question. Someone asks, can or should we make strange bedfellows with those in the political right who oppose Gates? Something that is a very interesting political dynamic happening right now, whereas, the political right very much, is at odds with Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation because they think he's a Marxist, which is hilarious. But you do have, it's only this like shrinking centrist, liberal, mainstream New York Times, Washington Post kind of like world that still believes that Bill Gates is this white savior that we should praise. But outside of that shrinking bubble, the political dynamics around the political conversation around Gates is really changing. I think he's lost a lot of standing and relevancy on the public stage. Anyone want to take on either of those questions?
Yes, to start off with, Tim, we are looking at reparations as the starting point for our movement going forward. We have been taken down. We need to start somewhere, and we need those resources to build and to also start conscientizing further the policymakers to actually make them realize that they did not choose the right way for the communities that they represent. We also need to have the movements. When we are looking at agroecology, it has to be localized. The people are organizing, the people are supporting each other. The people are looking at the things that have been damaged, especially when we are looking at biodiversity that need to be restored. We are looking at the broken institutions that need to be put back into their rightful places. The institutions like the indigenous knowledge systems that need to be taken on board, and together with friendly science, one that looks at the kind of damage that the environment is suffering, that built together in an agroecology movement would then set us going, and we would keep on pushing for the restoration, because when we are saying reparations, we are saying restore that which you damaged. We should not just walk away. Maybe when we are looking at Gates saying in 20 years you would leave everything, you would be walking away from the problems that he has created. And it is time that we call him in to say, before you retire, please restore that which was damaged. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in and recommend that people read a book called Reconsidering Reparations by Olufemi Taiwo. And it really argues that true reparations must be more than financial payouts. They must be really a world building project that redistributes power and resources to historically oppressed communities, right? And so Bill Gates stands in opposition to that, whether it's U.S. public education or his policies in health around the world. And in terms of uh, making strange bedfellows with the right, I think that that is a mistake because our problem is not just with Bill Gates, right? Our problem was with oligarchy, as the panel title suggests. And so if we work with those on the right to go after Bill Gates, we will be strengthening the system of oligarchy, a capitalist system that is designed to enrich the few. And we'll be creating other Bill Gates and other philanthrocapitalists who use their wealth to degrade education, health, and the rest of our lives. So we need to build an independent working class movement that's fusing the power of social movements, of parents, students, teachers, educators, with the power of unions to take on the billionaire class as a whole. And that's a project that the right is not interested in at all.
Absolutely. I think we're at time, Nicoletta, so we're going to wrap it up. But I will just say, and that's a great way to end this. I mean, it's easy to become fatalistic by the awesome power that someone like Bill Gates has, and to look at the growing specter of oligarchy from people like Elon Musk, even Donald Trump. It's very easy to become fatalistic, but I hope people come away from this webinar with some sense of inspiration and ambition that another world is possible, that the solutions are not that complicated. It's really just a matter of political fight to make our solutions, to advance our solutions and to make our voices heard. I certainly leave the panel inspired by everything that everyone said today. And of course, this is only this is not the end of it. This is a first step or a 10th step in this growing public debate around oligarchic power. But it is, again, I'd say it is very important that we recenter this debate to really focus on Bill Gates and to understand, as Jesse just said, the idea is not that there's good billionaires and bad billionaires, or good oligarchs and or bad oligarchs, but that oligarchy as an institution, that billionaires as an institution must be confronted and challenged and dismantled and abolished. So I thank everyone who joined the panel today. I thank everyone in the audience from around the world who tuned in. Until next time.
Thank you, team. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank
See
you,
you next
everyone.
time.
Thank you, everyone.
So much from